I will begin by introducing you, and then we have a few questions, and we'll see how much time we actually have. We have Donald Steinberg, who is President and Chief Executive Officer of World Learning, an international nonprofit organization that provides education, exchange, and development programs in more than 60 countries. He brings more than 35 years of experience in government and non-governmental organizations and expertise in the fields of international relations and development. You have worked at the USAID, also the State Department, you were ambassador. I mean, you can see all the biography in the programs. I think since we don't have a lot of time, I won't expand too much more. Then we have Luis Benveniste, who is actually Education Practice Manager for Global Engagement and Knowledge at the World Bank. And he was actually the core author of the World Bank's WDR, the World Development Report, which was entitled Gender Equality and Development. That was a 2012 WDR report, which is the flagship report of the World Bank. And he has extensive experience in Cambodia and Laos on issues of schools and teaching. And he's a graduate of Stanford University and also Harvard. Last but not least, we have Kolleen Bouchane. I hope I didn't destroy it, okay? She has been working for more than a decade with advocates in the US and around the world, coordinating legislative actions and campaigns at the national and international level to achieve universal access to education, essential medicine, water, sanitation, and other services necessary to the realization of economic and human rights. She's currently the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the A World at School campaign and Director of Policy and Research for the Global Business Coalition for Education. And I noticed in the program her Twitter handle wasn't on it, so it's my chance to tell you that is basically her last name, Bouchane, in case you want to follow her. When I arrived, she was already tweeting. She's quite active. And I'll take the privilege of being the person asking questions, and I'll start with you, since we're talking about Twitter and seeing you so active. I want to hear a little bit more about the how, and I think we at the bank are very interested in the process, in the how, because it's the best way to learn how we can achieve results. And I want to know a little bit more about this coalition and how much social media and Twitter is helping you raise the volume, as we just heard from Julie. How much are we using or taking advantage of tools that we have, 21st century tools to communicate, to raise the value on different issues like the one that you're part of now?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, I'm very active on Twitter. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at it. It's like a cocktail party. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes less so. What I would say is that the Global Business Coalition for Education and World at School both have the same mission. It's all of the out-of-school children from primary school. So there are 58 million children out of school. I know you all know this terrible story. We use social media very differently in the coalition and in a World at School. Both of them have this primary mission of creating pressure. So particularly through our work at A World at School, we're trying to create pressure. We're trying to demonstrate outrage. I think this turn up the volume on some of these issues, and particularly on out-of-school girls. And so social media ends up being a big piece of that. My best piece of advice would be don't just use social media. I think the people in this room who do this in a very sophisticated way, with very deep conversations on data, know that. And I think one of the reasons I took this role was because I'm a little bit of a data geek as well. So the idea is to have the evidence and then have an understanding about how to use it on those social media platforms. So we do a lot of very in-depth reports or white papers, and we also do a lot of social share graphics. One of the best ways that we use this is in collaboration with members of our coalition and other partners. So you don't make a giant noise by yourself. A good example of that was the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. We didn't start that. That started in Nigeria. We were very active in trying to raise attention to that. And of course, the drawback to that, it's a good example because it didn't have yet its ultimate aim, that campaign. But in fact, it has created different types of legislation, different types of awareness, and has massively added to the movement for protecting children and education from attack. So I think, you know, it's not all by itself. It's never going to be the answer, but it's a great method of turning up the volume.
Ambassador Steinberg, I'm sure you are very active on Twitter too. I'm not, to the point that my Twitter handle is not in the program, and I don't feel bad about that. But let me ask you, you've done a lot on education and also gender-based violence. How, again, the process, how are you helping raise the awareness on these issues?
Well, my principal activity in that regard is working with policymakers. I think we have seen an incredible transformation from the period maybe 20 to 30 years ago where we talked about all of these issues in terms of the individual impact on the person involved. And increasingly, I think we're understanding that we all pay a price from our collective failure to address these issues. We cannot build peace in post-conflict countries. We cannot achieve the goal of eliminating extreme poverty around the world within the next 2 decades. We cannot address combating extremist violence unless we involve 100% of the population in these efforts. The difficulty now that we've moved from this being a soft issue to a hard issue is that institutions don't understand how they implement this. And for me, there are 4 key priorities that have to be established. First, you have to do the projects. You have to be on the ground. You have to be, as World Learning is, training 90,000 teachers in Pakistan to create an education system that's liberal, that's quality, that's open to girls, and that can compete with the madrasas. And you've got to be able to explain to your board why you're going into Pakistan. In my case, I went out and bought 25 copies of I Am Malala, sent 1 copy to each member of the board, and I said, if you don't think we should be doing girls' education in Pakistan, you let me know. And I'm not sure how many read the book, but no one reported back. We also need to apply the same tough standards to those projects that we do to any project. So we need to look at sustainability, scalability, time-bound measurable goals. We have to look at outputs, not just inputs. We have to have sophisticated monitoring and evaluation systems. Secondly, as Julie was saying, we need to mainstream and integrate all of these. As she said quite eloquently, it's not just the Minister of Education and Women's Affairs, it is the Finance Minister, it is the Transport Minister, the Health Minister. When I was Deputy Administrator at AID, we instituted a rule that said every single project that we did, no matter what the area, had to have a gender impact statement. And I will tell you, the first gender impact statement that was given to me was about a bridge we will be building in Africa. And the gender impact statement, and I swear this is true, was 50% of the people going across that bridge will be women.
Yeah, it's one way.
Yeah, it is one way, but it wasn't exactly what we were trying to get at. You know, we did say, so what is this doing to migration patterns and what is this doing to social impact? It's no, 50%. The third thing is that we have to build institutions that serve as thought leaders. We have to be able to create communities of practice within our own organizations. We have to be able to, you know, at AID, for example, in 2012, put together a series of reports on gender-based violence, on implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1325, on eliminating child marriage, on countering trafficking in persons. And you involve the entire community in that exercise in order to build an internal constituency for highlighting these issues. I also think, and I love your original question, the question of technology. Because we've got 6.5 billion cell phones in the world. We can build and send into space a satellite for $67,000. Even someone who's 62, like me, has to know about data-paloozas and hackathons and crowdsourcing and open data. That's the world we live in, and we're not applying it in this space. And then finally, we have to walk the talk in-house. Each of our organizations has to be promoting women to positions of power, to be looking at all of our employment practices to make sure we don't have hidden discriminators in there, to be doing planning, to involve gender considerations in promotions and honors that we give, and to look at family-friendly employment practices.
Okay, well, this is very deep, and I appreciate it a lot, but let me see if I can get Luis involved in this. And just one thought, Ambassador mentioned the goal, one of the main twin goals of the World Bank, which is eradicating poverty, extreme poverty by 2030. You were one of the key authors of the WDR on gender equity and development. What was one of the key messages from that report, what you found looking around the world at the data on how important it is, women equality, for eradicating poverty?
So I had the great privilege of being part of the team that put together the World Development Report on gender equality and development. And sort of the starting point was trying to figure out sort of, what was the cause that led that in some domains, in some areas, we have seen pretty good progress on gender parity. For example, it took Morocco about a decade in terms of girls' participation in schooling, and it took about the US 40 years to achieve the same rates. And on the other hand, though, we see domains where there's been very, very little progress. So that was a starting point to sort of begin a conversation to sort of really think through as to gender equality is not just a rights issue, but it's a smart economics issue. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's a smart thing to do. And so we look specifically at sort of how sort of some of the drivers, sort of some of the main sort of rationales to sort of why we see great progress in some domains relates to the fact that when we have formal institutions like the legal framework of a country in tandem with social norms that support sort of change, as well as when economic opportunities are open. So when these things come together, we see great movement towards gender equality. On the other hand, when we see compounding inequalities, when these things sort of do not support each other, we see very, very little progress. And for example, in the area of, when we look at the developing countries, we see that women tend to die at much greater rates than men. And sort of there are 4 million excess deaths of women in the developing world a year. And again, some of the rationale behind it has to do with sort of how these social norms, formal institutions, and economic opportunities don't support each other to really sort of foster sort of greater opportunities for gender equality.
Right, Kolleen, let me ask you something about the business coalition too, because obviously involving, you mentioned policymakers, and we have to involve everybody. How about businesses? How is your experience? How is that work?
So here's what's really interesting, actually. One of the things that all of our businesses agree when they join the coalition, at whatever level, is that education is a human right. And these are, more than 100 of the most committed businesses, some of them who founded the coalition and some of them who are just now getting involved. Some of them who give it a very high level, some of them who contribute their expertise, and some of them who have education as their core business. So they have a kind of a stake in the landscape. What's really interesting, though, when you compare health to education, is that business investment is about 1/16 of what it is in health across the board. And so what's really fascinating is I know the business leaders I'm working with are completely committed. They are giving. But the scale is completely different from health. And I find that, that's a lot of the impetus for a world at school. You find that we have this amazing data. We have this evidence. We have no shortage of business leaders. I think you met one of our youth leaders earlier. We have no shortage of people who understand, believe this, and the rhetoric on the importance of education, in addition to the evidence, is very high. And yet, the financing does not follow the evidence at all. It doesn't follow it from the leading donors. It continues to decrease over the last 2 years as we're trying to reach education for all. It's literally crashing. The only donor that has continued to increase their investments is Norway. For multilaterals, we have this amazing graph. UNESCO puts out this beautiful report every year where they actually just say what's true. We have this beautiful graph of multilateral investment in education, and it just goes like this. It's kind of crazy. And it's the same for businesses. Although our member companies have joined specifically because they want to continue to scale up and invest wisely, we find that that's a kind of a fraction of what needs to happen, a drop in the bucket.
Please walk the talk. What is the World Bank doing to try to certainly increase the funding for multilaterals on this issue?
As many of you know, the World Bank has been undergoing a major reorganization. And it's a testament of the commitment to gender equality that sort of the first new sector strategy that the bank is developing is on gender. The last gender strategy was in 2001, and now the new gender strategy is actually now in the process of being a widespread worldwide consultation. So all of you are certainly welcome to go to the World Bank homepage. If you do www.worldbank.org/gender, you'll see front and center sort of the consultation page, and you can sort of read the concept note and provide comments there. In terms of sort of the sort of main priorities that sort of are being fleshed out in that strategy are really sort of focusing on these compounding inequalities and with a particular emphasis on trying to promote greater economic opportunities for women, labor force participation, equal pay, entrepreneurship opportunities, as well as in the voice and agency realm, and in particular sort of what has to do with sort of ownership of assets.
Ambassador Steinberg, you had the advantage or the privilege, I assume, to work under Secretary Hillary Clinton.
I did.
How does it help to have a woman at the helm?
Well, it helps to have Hillary Clinton at the helm.
I wasn't going to say it.
No, I watched. I worked in the White House in 1993 to 95, and had the opportunity to work with the secretary in her run-up to the Beijing conference. And it is thrilling to have someone who wakes up in the morning wondering what she can do about not only women's empowerment, but addressing marginalization of all people. Because we tend to forget what I guess is being called intersectionality now. That not only are you a woman, but you could be disabled. You could be part of the LGBT community. You could be part of the indigenous population. And the prejudice and discrimination you face compounds in those settings. And the secretary understood that. I would say, obviously, that the current secretary understands it as well, but she literally woke up in the morning saying, what can I do? And I was the aide deputy administrator at the time, and I used to think of myself as Milan Vivir's bagman, because she would call me up and say, hey, the secretary called me up and sent me an email over official lines. And said, the secretary had this idea that we need to put together programs to protect women peacemakers. And we want to create a program that gives them stipends and gives them training and gives them protection, because it's a very dangerous profession. What can you do? And literally by the end of the day, we'd identified $15 million and announced a new program to start women peace-building support systems around the world that have really changed things. So yes, it was pretty remarkable. I will also say that I'm delighted that Susan Markham is doing what she's doing at AID, because we had a real dream team with Carla Coppell, with Karen Groen, with Sarah Mendelson, and others at AID from 2010 to 2013, and they're keeping up that pattern.
Great. I think we have a few minutes, but I'd like to finish with something that is always important to me, and it is the why. And if you can keep it short. Why do you care about these issues? Why are you involved in these issues? How do you get to this? Take your turns, whoever wants to begin.
We're going to do this in the same order, okay? Well, it kind of goes back. Let me go back to the very beginning, actually, in speaking of peacekeeping. I actually was a peacekeeper in Somalia many years ago. After that, I worked on health issues. I worked on sanitation issues. I think that from a career point of view, I've done kind of a full circle and come back to education. You were in the military, too. I was in the military.
Where were you in the military?
Oh, in the U.S. Army.
Oh, yeah, but no, where were you? Were you stationed abroad?
In Somalia.
Oh, in Somalia, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So from a career point of view, I've done kind of a complete circle and come back to education. I studied conflict security and development, and we've come at this today, through this course of this day, through so many different angles for a good reason. All roads lead back to education. It's the only thing that can't be taken away from you. It has all kinds of impacts on your livelihood, your life expectancy, your ability to protect your family, your health outcomes, whether or not your children will live or die. And so if you really care about social justice, if you really care about healthy lives, if you really care about growth, you work on education until we get there. And after we get there, we can all write bad fiction or do something less important. I don't know. But honestly, I just don't, especially right now when we need to like ramp up the level of outrage and financing, education is the place to be.
Kolleen could have been more eloquent. I think that the only thing that I would have to add, though, is that the other side of the coin is, we've been at it, in this field for, many decades, and I think that, so we keep bumping against all kinds of bottlenecks and roadblocks, and ultimately, I think that it's time to really sort of give a very concerted focus effort to really sort of move the frontier forward, and we know that gender equality is the key to achieve sort of sustained growth and the road to happiness.
Right?
So I read the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and there's actually some truth there. And so I'm going to give you a very Mars answer here.
Okay.
Societies that respect women, that bring girls into educational processes, that use the full talents of women, do not tend to traffic in drugs and in people and in weapons. They don't transmit pandemic diseases. They don't send vast numbers of refugees across borders or across oceans. They don't harbor terrorists. They don't harbor pirates. And significantly, they don't require American troops on the ground. And so it is in our most profound national security interest to be promoting the role of women in peace building, in society, and in education.
Thank you so much.